If I told you you couldn't say quarterback or anything about the New Orleans Saints coaching staff, what would you say are the three biggest needs for this team this offseason? I'll tell you mine. We got all of that and a little bit of land yap for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? Welcome in to another episode of Locked On Saints, your daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks so much, as always, making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget, we're free and available on all podcast apps and on YouTube as well. And I'm your host, Ross Jackson, at Ross Jackson Nola on Twitter, your New Orleans Saints expert, credential member of the media, CrescentCitySports.com, USA Today Saints Wire, Tuesdays on Locked On NFL, and here with you every single Monday through Friday on Locked On Saints. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by Ultimate Football GM. Have you ever dreamed of becoming an NFL GM and running your own franchise? Well, this game is definitely for you. If so, you can download it by visiting ultimate-gm.com or searching in your app stores. Our listeners are also going to get a 100% free boost to their franchise when you use the promo code Locked On, all caps, in the game store. I'll tell you more about them later. But on today's episode, we're taking a look at the New Orleans Saints' three biggest non-quarterback, non-coaching staff needs over the course of the off season. So we'll start off with identifying those three big needs. Then we'll take a look specifically at running back. I'm just going to tell you one of them right off the bat. Running back is a big time need. We're going to take a look at the veteran running backs to watch over the course of this offseason. And then we'll talk about changing the approach to how the New Orleans Saints address their edge rushers moving forward and why it would benefit them to maybe take a different angle when it comes to that position. So to start off with our biggest needs of the 2023 offseason, again, we're not saying quarterback. We're not saying anything about the coaching staff, though we know, needs all around the coaching staff right now, whether that be offensive coordinator. Some of you, of course, will say head coach as well. Quarterback is obviously a need for the New Orleans Saints going into 2023, just in terms of answering that question, right? It could still be Jameis Winston. It could be Andy Dalton again. But in either case, you still have to answer the question, and it's a big time need for the New Orleans Saints. But for me, their top three needs this offseason: edge rusher, interior defensive line, running back. Not necessarily in that order, but that's the way that I'm looking at it, because we're going to speak about the defensive line, edge rusher and interior defensive line first. Then we'll take a look at some of the veteran running backs that are going to be available on the market. Defensive line is a spot that the New Orleans Saints absolutely need help. We have seen this team not be who they have been before in the past when it comes to the run game, and a lot of that has to do with the inability to win up front. This team has struggled having their defensive line completely reset 1 or 2 yards downfield from the line of scrimmage, meaning that offensive linemen are pushing them back up against their heels 2-3 yards in some cases. So part of the reason why the Saints have struggled in defending the run has been yards after contact, but there's a considerable amount of yards before contact that's been a bit of an issue as well. Teams sometimes, or the New Orleans Saints, along their defensive line, guys like David Onyemata, who's an interior defensive lineman, edge rushers and edge defenders like Cam Jordan and Marcus Davenport have been getting there like average yards per tackle 2-3 yards upfield, as opposed to at the line of scrimmage or even behind the line of scrimmage, which were a lot of these averages before. So when you think about the average depth of tackle for these guys, it's a little bit too far downfield. So the running backs are easily getting 2 or 3 yards on a 1st and 10, which is exactly what you want to at least get on those types of runs automatically without really having to do anything else. So how do you help to benefit or bolster this offensive line or this defensive line? A couple of other things to keep in mind is that the only defensive lineman under contract next year in 2023 is rookie Jordan Jackson, who's currently on the practice squad. And then the only edge rushers that are or the big need at edge rusher is going to be figuring out who's going to be the person opposite Cam Jordan. It doesn't seem like there's any doubt that Cam Jordan's back in the building next year. So with that being the case, who's going to be the guy on the opposite side with Marcus Davenport, their former first round selection, on a contract year? And who knows if the New Orleans Saints are even going to be interested, let alone able to retain him, considering how much he's kind of fallen off in this contract year. Half sack on the year, not a lot of tackles for a loss, hasn't been as disruptive as he has been in the run game in the past before as well. The team absolutely needs better production opposite Cam Jordan, and really even in rotation with Cam Jordan as well, because when Cam Jordan comes off the field, Peyton Turner hasn't been able to be on the field, another first-round talent, and Carl Granderson's been the only other guy that you've really been able to rotate in there. So who are some of the players to identify on the edge as well as on the interior? Well, starting on the edge, a reasonable contract for a guy like Larry Ogunjobi could absolutely be reached. Raheem Grant, who's got 4 sacks on the season for the Houston Texans, don't know that they're really going to be in a hurry to keep anybody, or really if anybody's going to be in a hurry to stick around with them, particularly an unrestricted free agent like him. There could be an opportunity there for the New Orleans Saints to come in. Sorry, Raheem Green, not Grant, to be able to come in and swoop him up off of the market. Larry Ogunjobi is another, as I mentioned before. You look at, some of these guys when it comes to their market value, according to SpotRack, who tracks all of these things in terms of contracts. Both of these guys, Raheem Green as well as Larry Ogunjobi, who is dealing with a toe injury at the moment, $3.4 million per year is right around the average for their market value. 2 years, $6 to $7 million, not a lot to ask for there in terms of being able to, pick up one of those free agents. The Saints could also potentially rekindle an old flame. You'll remember a few years ago, they were in on Robert Quinn, but Robert Quinn ended up going somewhere else. So he could be another guy. They could go across the division potentially and try, or a guy that used to be across the division, and try to grab a guy like Dante Fowler, who's going to be a free agent this offseason, although Fowler doesn't really meet this year's kind of prototype, coming back from the Dallas Cowboys at this point. His market value over at SpotRack right now amounting to about $7 million per year. So maybe a little bit more outside of the price range there. But, there are certain sort of spots that the New Orleans Saints would definitely be able to find some pretty good talent when it comes to edge rusher over the course of this season. Another name to watch out for is Samson Ebukam, who went to Eastern Washington, spent some time bouncing around the NFC West, currently with the San Francisco 49ers. His contract value is up there, but he's young enough at only 27 years old that you could do a multi-year contract with him, a longer-term contract to kind of spread that cap hit out. So there are definitely edge rusher potential players that are going to be on the market over the course of the offseason, and even more if they expand a little bit their approach at the edge rusher position. So we're going to be breaking that down a little bit later on. On the interior, one of the guys that I've talked about before, Daron Payne, is somebody that looks like he's going to be headed to the free agent market. He was someone with the Washington Commanders whose name got tossed around in a bunch of trade talks before the trade deadline. Nothing ever came to fruition there, but he could potentially find his way to the free agent market. Sitting on 9 sacks from the interior right now means he's going to be in for a pretty big payday. But if you're looking at spending the money, that could be a place where you do exactly that. If you're looking for maybe some more classic guys that are a little bit more kind of run stoppers instead, you can go with guys like Dalvin Tomlinson from the Minnesota Vikings, or of course Javon Hargraves. Although I will say Javon Hargraves, 10 sacks on the season as well. So he's not limited over in Philadelphia to just being a run stopper, although he's a very effective run defender. He's also been a very good penetrating 3-tech pass rusher from the interior as well. What about an old flame on that part of the field? You're looking to re-sign David Onyemata more than likely. I think he's a must keep for you with 4 sacks on the season right now. But what about Sheldon Rankins, who's got 3 sacks on the season as well? Could you potentially bring him back from the New York Jets? I know he's dealt with a lot of injuries over the course of his time and over the course of his career, but right now sitting on a market value around $7 million as well, doesn't really put him outside of reach for the New Orleans Saints once they're done restructuring contracts and all those other things. If they wanted to go with somebody that's kind of around that same age, a little bit younger, they could take a look at Taven Bryan, who's been on the move from a couple of different places. He's now in Cleveland, so they'll get a pretty good look up close and personal with him this coming weekend, and maybe he could be somebody that ends up catching their eye a bit to where they'll want to watch out for them. So I guess the bottom line is here, like I threw a lot of names at you, right? Edge rushers like Larry Ogunjobi, Rasheem Green, Samson Ebukam, Robert Quinn, interior defensive linemen like Deron Payne, Sheldon Rankins, Javon Hargraves, Dalvin Tomlinson, of course, hoping to re-sign David Onyemata this offseason. There are so many different places to go here before you even get to the draft where the Saints should be able to improve and maybe even kind of rebuild that defensive line over the course of the offseason. So if that's a spot that you've been concerned over the course of this year, don't fret. There's lots of opportunities to rebuild that spot over the course of the offseason. Coming up next, another spot where the Saints have a lot of opportunity to add veteran talent is actually going to be on the running back or in the running back room as well, including 2 running backs they're going to get a look at this coming weekend. We're going to be taking a look at running backs for the New Orleans Saints as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. Today's episode brought to you, our friends over at Ultimate Pro Football GM, the mobile game that I am so excited about. Them being a new partner and sponsoring today's episode is awesome. This mobile game is absolutely one of my favorite things that I have right now. And I'm usually not a mobile game person. It's not really my thing. I tend to just kind of like stare off into space or like scroll on Twitter or whatever when I'm like waiting for something. But now with this game, I'm fully in, I'm fully invested. So if you think about, wanting to become like an NFL GM or like run your own team, that's the itch that this game scratches in ways that that other game that you're probably thinking of has not been able to do successfully for years and years and years. You can hire your own coaches and coordinators. You could trade players. You can make draft picks. You can even go out there and like navigate your franchise through free agency and the draft and the salary cap, all of that stuff. So make sure you go and check it out today. It's Ultimate Football GM, completely free and playable offline. So you can play on the go. There's no timeouts or anything like that when you do stuff. So you can play as much as you want, whenever you want to. So it's really, really cool. Move at your own pace without any concerns. Locked On Saints listeners can also get a 100% free boost to their franchise when you use the promo code Locked On in all caps in the game store. That's Locked On in all caps. So make sure you check it out today. To download the game, just visit ultimate-gm.com or look it up in the app stores. That's ultimate-gm.com so you can get a hold of Ultimate Football GM. Start your franchise today. Today's episode also brought to you by Audible. Did you know that Audible is releasing a whole new slate of new football podcasts that you're sure to love? In fact, we're so confident that you're going to love it. It's why you can actually find a sneak preview of an episode of The League available over at the Locked On NFL podcast on the audio side, narrated by Super Bowl champion and legendary smack talker in Richard Sherman, as well as sports broadcaster and rising star Taylor Rooks. It's an 8-episode docuseries about the bizarre, inspirational, and unlikely stories that are connected to your favorite sport, pro football. The bonus episode is really cool. It's all about an episode. It's titled The Way of the Cowboy, WEI, and it's this incredible story about how the 1977 Dallas Cowboys brought in Bruce Lee's protege to teach their entire defense martial arts, thus ushering in a brand new approach to the way that the league as a whole trained. It's super, super cool. Equal parts history, entertainment, social commentary, all right there for you on The League. So head over to Locked On NFL today to listen to a bonus episode of The League or catch the full series wherever you get your podcasts available. Now, Audible, get in the game. All right, family, continuing on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. Thanks again, as always, making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day, every day. The New Orleans Saints should be in the running back market this offseason. We've broken down some of the guys that make sense in the draft, but it's not limited to just a draft. There are some free agents out there that would make a ton of sense for the New Orleans Saints as well, including 2 guys they're going to get a look at this weekend and another potential reunion. Got to always look at the reunions when it comes to the New Orleans Saints. Before we dive into this, I do want to mention we just got the text message from Saints PR. Demario Davis selected for his first time in his entire career as a Pro Bowler. Congratulations to Demario Davis. We're going to be getting some more Pro Bowl nominations here in just a little bit. I'll keep you up to date with those as we go through. But I believe he's going to be the only Saints player to make it. There are a couple of alternatives that I've already known about. Tyrann Mathieu, Adam Prentice, and I think long snapper Zach Wood is another. But as of right now, Demario Davis, starter for the Pro Bowl, first time in his career, which is wild to think of, especially when you consider how good he's been and for how long. Really, really wild. But nonetheless, congratulations to Demario Davis. Much, much, much deserved. Really, really cool. So let's take a look at the running backs here that the New Orleans Saints could potentially target in the free agent market, the veteran running backs over the course of this offseason. So there are a couple of the big names that are going to be out there. Saquon Barkley's in a contract year. Josh Jacobs went off in a contract year. There are those guys, don't get me wrong. But, however, outside of those names, actually two guys in New Orleans are going to get a close look at over the course of this coming weekend. Kareem Hunt right now, who's got 3 rushing touchdowns on the season and a receiving touchdown, 447 rushing yards, 182 rushing yards. He's one of those guys. And then another guy that I really, really like that I think deserves a little bit more opportunity than unfortunately he's going to get in Cleveland because he's behind guys like Kareem Hunt and of course Nick Chubb, who missed practice for a second day in a row on Wednesday, by the way, is D'Ernest Johnson. D'Ernest Johnson, just a few carries so far this season. Not really a lot going on for him just yet, but he's one of those guys that I think has a ton of potential that just kind of gets stuck behind really good options that are ahead of him of no diminishing, returns to himself at all. I mean, the guy's only 26 years old to be 27 next season. So he's got a lot of tread left on the tires, not getting a ton of run over in Cleveland. So might be looking for a new situation over the course of the offseason. If you've heard the name D'Ernest Johnson on the show before, it's because I talked about potentially trading for him at the trade deadline. But unfortunately, the Saints weren't able to make any moves at the trade deadline. So those are two guys that the Saints could potentially get a look at. Kareem Hunt, of course, gives you somebody that can contribute in the passing game, contribute in the run game. D'Ernest Johnson is somebody that is very, very fast, probably faster than both Kareem Hunt and Nick Chubb, but can also run right up the middle as well. I think he would need a little bit of work in the receiving game, but if you're looking for somebody that's a little bit more of a complement as opposed to a copy of Alvin Kamara, then a guy like D'Ernest Johnson makes a ton of sense. Another player that I would love to see, but I just don't see it happening, but I would absolutely love to see it, is Jamal Williams, running back for the Detroit Lions. This dude has been the heart and soul of the Detroit Lions all season. There was a time to where he had nearly double-digit touchdowns at the time and had only ever had a long touchdown run of 3 yards or something like that. Just like a red zone beast over the course of this time. But if you watched Hard Knocks, if you paid attention to him throughout the season, he is just such a good personality, really awesome culture guy, super perfect for what they're doing in Detroit right now with sort of the culture revamp that's been going on there. So I don't think he escapes Detroit. I think that I don't know that he wants to either. I think he loves what's happening there, but just a name to watch out for. I really, really like Jamal Williams. Love seeing him thrive. Love seeing him win. So it'd just be a cool one to see potentially hit the market, and it could potentially end up benefiting your favorite team instead of what is becoming America's team in the Detroit Lions. Don't tell the Cowboys fans that I said that. Another name to watch out for, Rashaad Penny, again about the same age as a Jamal Williams, or really actually probably closer to the same age as a D'Ernest Johnson. Coming out of Seattle, had a lot of opportunities in Seattle, looked really good against the Saints, but then ended up with an injury at one point. He's got 2 rushing touchdowns on the season. He only appeared in 5 games. So this could be another one of those sort of Chris Carson situations, right? To where he's got a really, really low offseason value because of the injuries, but then may never really be able to bounce back from the injury. So we'll see exactly how it all works out for him. But man, if he's somebody that ends up hitting the market and can get healthy, he'll be an absolute steal potentially for some team that goes out and gets him. Now I mentioned, I promise you a reunion as well. Because look, we just always have to accept that this is a possibility with the New Orleans Saints, right? Guys like Teddy Bridgewater, who we talked about earlier today, a guy like Sheldon Rankins, who we talked about earlier this episode. Now let's get to the running back version. What about Boston Scott? You remember the New Orleans Saints brought him in from Louisiana Tech. Everyone was super hype about him. He had a great preseason, all that. And then the Saints ended up letting him go. Then he got picked up by the Philadelphia Eagles, and he's got 2 touchdowns on the season, over 12 games played so far. He's only got 15 receiving yards. He hasn't really been the Boston Scott that we've seen in the past, but I mean, he led the team in rushing touchdowns for a little while at one point last year and everything. like he's been awesome for them, and he's led the running back room in touchdowns for some time now, even over guys like Miles Sanders, for instance. So I would love to see, this is another one of those guys that you don't bring in to be a change of pace guy with Alvin Kamara. You bring him in to be another Alvin Kamara, so you don't have to change the playbook, and you have another guy you can utilize in that way. Kind of like what Eno Benjamin has the potential of being, kind of like what I was going to say Tajay Spears, but Tajay Spears can also run for you. But you look at some of the other guys we talked about in yesterday's episode, like Gibbs out of Alabama in the draft, for instance. Jahmyr Gibbs, he could be somebody that is a little bit more of like an Alvin Kamara clone that you put in the exact same situations, utilize him in the exact same ways that you utilize an Alvin Kamara. That's kind of who Boston Scott is as well. And this is, he's got a nose. He's got a nose for the end zone. He's always looking for it. So those are a couple of the free agent options. But this is another example here, just like the defensive line. It's where, like, if you want to go out there and get a veteran to help revamp your running back room, there's going to be a lot of those names available. And the best part about it is that, like, the Saints don't need one of the big time free agents like a Saquon Barkley or a Josh Jacobs, right? So while the rest of the NFL is clamoring over those guys, the New Orleans Saints can slide into the DMs of a Boston Scott or even a Miles Sanders. Miles Sanders is going to be a free agent as well. And then you look at these other guys like Jerick McKinnon and Dearness Johnson, that, like, maybe some of these guys don't necessarily get the attention that they should get at a highly volatile position in running back. And with those top tier running backs also being on the market that everyone's going to be clamoring after unless they re-sign with their own teams, which is all very possible, of course. The Saints could slide in them DMs and then bring in some really, really good talent at running back to start to pair up and rebuild that pair up with Alvin Kamara and rebuild that running back room along with Alvin Kamara and potentially, Benjamin, who is under contract for 2023. And it's not a very expensive contract either. It's like just over $1 million. So no need to move on from him for salary cap purposes. Coming up next, if the New Orleans Saints really want to revitalize that defensive line, they'll do it with an adjusted viewpoint of what their usual edge rusher prototype is. Ross, what are you talking about? I'll tell you as we continue on to wrap up today's episode of Locked On Saints. And today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by, it's time, Total Wine and More. I love Total Wine and More. Head over there all the time. I'm going to go out of town for the holidays, but when I come back, veterans coming to see you over in Metairie. It'll be coming to see you. If you check out Total Wine and More, if you're somebody that loves your, let's say, like single barrel bourbon and you want to find your new favorite, or you have a favorite and you want to know where to get it, Total Wine and More is absolutely the place for you to go check out. With so many different bottles to choose from, it's going to be really hard for you not to find what it is that you're looking for. Or maybe you're not even looking for yourself. Maybe you're just looking for the perfect gift for somebody this holiday. Maybe you're looking for a gift for yourself. Remember to treat yourself as well. And you want some help from a friendly guide. Well, Total Wine and More's customer service is unmatched, unparalleled. Make sure you go and check them out. And you'll be able to do it all with the confidence of knowing that you're going to find something special at the lowest price. So love what you find what you love over at Total Wine and More. Curbside pickup and delivery are available in most areas. TotalWine.com is where you want to go to learn more. Spirits not sold in Virginia or North Carolina. Drink responsibly and be 21. Let's get it. Who Dat Nation, wrapping up today's episode of Locked On Saints with a quick look at, like I said, if the New Orleans Saints really want to like rebuild that defensive line and take a different approach to the defensive line, they may be able to do that by simply changing sort of what the prototype has been at defensive end, right? At edge rusher. What are the things that the Saints really love in edge rushers? There's kind of three big things. They like big guys, they like tall guys, 6'4", 6'5", 6'6", 6'7". They like those guys. They like big, tall defensive ends. They want those guys where if you can't get to the quarterback, you stick your hands up in the air and hopefully you can knock the ball down. The other one that you can get, the other thing that you can see is that they like kind of, how do I say this? Stockier guys, 270, 280, 290. Like that's the range that they like these defensive ends, because they don't usually go for the speed rushing defensive ends. They want power. They want speed to power conversion guys. They want you to be able to get all that momentum behind all that mass and then transfer it into the offensive lineman who you then push into the lap of a quarterback. The third thing is exactly that. They look for the big, powerful guys. So you got to be tall, you got to be built, and you have to be strong. Those are the three big pieces of the criteria if I'm boiling them down to the like most easy, foundational way. Those are three things that they look for. So what's the opposite of that? The opposite of that is looking for these guys that are 6'3", 6'4", 250 to 270 pounds, and that are speed rushers that want to bend the edge, that want to get the edge, and that want to kind of like bend that corner and get around and be able to speed rush after those quarterbacks. Get to the quarterbacks within the first 3 seconds, 3.5 seconds of their snap, as opposed to right now to where you see a lot of like average time to sack for the New Orleans Saints is around like 5 to 6 seconds because they're pushing deeper and deeper and deeper into the play clock. So it's a lot of the coverage holding up, giving the defensive ends time or the defensive line time to collapse the pocket and be able to get after the quarterback, or the supplemental rush from the second level. That's one of the reasons why Demario Davis, first-time Pro Bowler, is like your sack leader for the New Orleans Saints right now with 6.5 sacks on the season, which is also a career high for him, by the way, as well. So then, if you really want to take a look at how the New Orleans Saints could revamp their defensive line, that's the big piece to look at. You go out and you find the Trevon Walker types. You go out and you find the the Dante Fowler types, or you go out and you find sort of the Yannick Ngakoue types, who, of course, is a free agent this offseason as well. These guys that win with speed, win with bend, win with athleticism as opposed to leverage and strength. And so that could be a route that the Saints go. Now, what do you sacrifice when you do that? When you get a little bit smaller at defensive end, it does impact your ability in the run game. That's why a lot of teams are moving to 3-4 as opposed to 4-3. So 3-4 meaning three down linemen and 4 linebackers, as opposed to 4-3, which would be 4 down linemen and 3 linebackers. So instead of those edge rushers coming off the edge with their hands in the dirt, like you see with even fronts, they would come off those edges from a 2-point stance, a bit of a running start, a bit wider of an angle. And then you have your 3 guys in the middle that are focused on being able to stop the run and all that. But then you can kind of designate an outside linebacker from either side to be able to rush the passer and really just focus on, playing on ball. And so could the Saints end up completely shifting to an odd man front? They would be able to do it because they run a lot of different looks for the, at least on the front, right? An odd front, they run even fronts. They're a multi-front team. The issue would be finding sort of like the 4 linebackers and all those other things. But now that you kind of have this emergence of Caden Ellis, now that you kind of have this Demario Davis and Pete Werner tandem in the middle, like, could you find an extra stand-up edge rusher at outside linebacker to pair opposite Caden Ellis, who the Saints will hopefully re-sign this offseason? Let Caden Ellis be one of those guys that comes off the edge, but then that can also drop back into coverage, and then find another pairing, another athletic linebacker that can also rush off the edge. And then your defensive ends and Cam Jordan and Carl Granderson and Peyton Turner can kind of remain who they are and do what they do. So there's a lot of different ways that the Saints could go about this. Like, they could change the defensive scheme up entirely, which seems unlikely, or they could just revamp how it is they look at the position of edge rusher, of defensive end. That seems more likely. So how do they do that? They do that by investing in some of the guys that we talked about. Larry Ogunjobi, Rasheem Green, Robert Quinn's one of those guys. Samson Ebukam's one of those guys. They can go and kind of reinvest in these kind of speedier, more athletic edge rushers. Yannick Ngakoue, who's had a great season so far this year. They could go and find those guys. The other option, of course, is to build that through the draft as well. That's where a Tyree Wilson or a verse from Florida State makes a lot of sense for them. Zach Harrison, of course, from Ohio State makes a lot of sense in that. So there's like a lot of those players where they'll be able to find that talent elsewhere. But I think that is something that the Saints absolutely should consider this offseason, is how they look at their edge rushers, how they classify their edge rushers, and what their prototype is. The other thing that helps with is that it might actually give you a way to utilize Zach Bond too, because Zach Bond came into the NFL with, came on the, hit the map for the NFL because of his edge rushing ability while he was at Wisconsin, not because he was a coverage linebacker. And the Saints kind of tried to turn him into a weak side linebacker. Then they kind of stuck him in as a strong side linebacker, but never really let him put his hands in the dirt and try to be an edge rusher. Now, at his size, I understand the hesitation there, but if you want to give somebody some stand-up edge rusher opportunities, or if you do want to try a smaller prototype, you might also even have one built into your roster already that you could give at least some opportunity there. I think you'd still need to put on a little bit of weight, get up to the 260 area as opposed to being around that 240, 250 area, but if they can do that with him, then he's even somebody that's even built in that could end up having that impact. Or you just continue to reinvest over the course of the offseason, whether through free agency or through the draft. And those opportunities, as we highlighted today, would absolutely be there. So whether or not the New Orleans Saints are looking to revamp edge rusher, interior defensive line, or running back, not only do they have the draft to do it, but they've got some really, really good options, at least so far. We'll see how many of these guys re-sign with their teams and all that, right? But even still, they should have a pretty good pool of players to select from to revamp all three of those positions in free agency, getting you some NFL experience, getting you guys that you've seen on tape before, that you already know how they work, and guys that you can already know whether or not they fit in your system. So really, really good opportunity for the New Orleans Saints to address those positions in free agency here in 2023. Let me know what your top 3 non-quarterback, non-coaching staff needs are for the New Orleans Saints over the course of this offseason and how you would solve those needs. I want to hear from you on this one as well. All right, y'all, coming up tomorrow, just one episode on Thursday, one episode on Friday, and we'll get back to 2-a-days after the Christmas holiday. So probably the next 2-a-day will actually be, well, technically Monday, because Saturday we'll do a post game, and then Monday you'll still have a full episode, and then Tuesday we'll get into our usual 2-a-days, back to mock drafts, things like that. So make sure you tune in tomorrow. Jeff Lloyd and I are going to break down everything you need to know about the New Orleans Saints traveling to take on the Cleveland Browns in freezing cold weather. Appreciate y'all as always for making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget to go and check out Locked On Sports today as well as your second listen to figure out everything going on around the world of sports. Go beyond the scoreboard, behind the scenes with the Locked On local experts on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. Appreciate you as always, making us a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me and the show. As always, if you see me, say hi. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints, make sure you follow me on Twitter at RossJackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you living. Let me know how you momming them. And trust Who Dat Nation, I'll holla at you.